inside the Parisi Palace, high above 3773 East Broadway. This is the Jake Feinberg Show. Coming to you on Power Talk. Please go to our website, powertalk.live. Download our free app and stream all of our live local programming, including Solomon on Blast, the Jim Parisi Show, and yours truly, the Jake Feinberg Show. We can't thank you enough for making us part of your day today. And really what it comes down to is that on my program, I get an opportunity to explore the regionalism of music in this country before full interconnection. And what that means is that cats were able to come together in an organic fashion, get discovered, and wind up becoming units on the bandstand for many, many years. When that happens, all of a sudden the vocabulary of music is expanded and extended. Music is the language of the soul. Rhythm is love. And that is what my show is about, and that is what my guest is about. In his numerous affiliations along the way, he's a decorated steel guitar player and is really just always tried to keep both feet on the ground. Rusty Young, welcome to the Jake Feinberg Show.
Well, Jake, it's nice to talk to you. Good morning.
Good morning to you too, my friend. You're up in the Rockies. Where you're up in Denver there?
No. I live in Missouri now.
Oh, really?
Yeah, about 2 hours southwest of St. Louis, out in the Mark Twain National Forest. It's like Colorado.
I mean,
with smaller mountains.
It is such a high honor, and a big thanks to a dear friend and Ted Goldfinger who connected us. And I just wanted to.
Oh yeah, Ted.
I wanted to. We opened with this mercurial band. Bonesy Creek, am I pronouncing that correctly?
I can't believe you found that.
We're going to do a deep dive, and I guarantee you, you're going to be talking about stuff that you haven't thought about or even talked about ever. So the question is this: we can get into that band later, but I need to know, Rusty, about your affiliation with, or the impact that the Beat Poets specifically had on you, Ginsberg, Ferlinghetti, Kerouac, the Pranksters, the Neurope. They had a center set up in Boulder, I think a little bit. Anyway, I just want you to talk about the impact that they had on you, not so much their writing, but maybe that you saw them live, or that they were coming to check out your gigs when you moved out to Southern California.
They had a great band. It was one of my favorite. Who are you talking about? No, I know what you mean.
Yeah.
Do you know that whole
They had a great band. I was like, whoa, they had a band?
It's a great question. I wish I had a great answer. That whole scene was going on, and I knew a lot of people who were involved in that scene, but I never was. I was so focused on Poco and, steel guitar at the time, and, because we were out in L.A. at that time, and we go between L.A. and San Francisco and play the Fillmore up there and the various clubs that were in San Francisco and L.A. And but we were so focused. I was so focused. When we started the band and really started working on it in '68, we were just poor as could be. Randy Meisner and George Grantham and myself especially, and we'd share an apartment and share a car, and we lived on ham sandwiches that we stole from the Troubadour when we were rehearsing there. And
absolutely,
it was we were so focused on this idea of music that was contemporary rock and roll, but with country instruments, making the color for steel guitar and banjo and dobro and that stuff. And back then there weren't synthesizers, and so if you wanted a different kind of color, a different kind of sound, you actually had to have someone who plays that instrument. And so, it was a whole different time. And that was something people weren't doing in the late 60s in music. They weren't combining country instruments with rock. And Clive Davis, once we released our record, called us into his office one time and looked me straight in the face and told me that you can't have steel guitar on a hit record. And so, we were facing some of that kind of backlash and fighting the fight.
Well, okay, so this is, let's go back to Bonesy. Am I pronouncing that correctly? Creek? Bonesy Creek?
I think it was Benzie Creek.
Benzie Creek? Is that what it was?
Crick.
Crick.
It could have been Crack. It would have been hipper, but no, it was Benzie Crick. It was a band, a rock band I joined. I was playing country music, and they asked me to join this rock band, and they were one of the popular rock bands in Denver, and so I joined that band right before Poco.
Is there, I mean, because part of my show is about the metaphysical, and, this would be foolish of me. I just wanted to know about if you could talk about the psychedelic experiences that you had at this time. LSD was legal in most parts. It was still made. Sandoz acid was still being made in universities and by the government, and it was the purest of acid. And I mean, I look at this band, and obviously somebody put this. All the tracks are online, by the way. And this Ashbury Wednesday is an amazing example of your burning. Were you playing steel in that band?
Yeah, that's on steel guitar. The way that happened is we had a producer, and we actually had a big hit in Colorado at the time. And this producer got tied up with these folks making the movie. What was it called? Flower Power, I think, at the time. Mm-hmm. It starred this new actor who was just breaking into to the business. His name was Jack Nicholson.
Oh yeah, very very unknown cat at that time.
And the odd thing is, so they wanted Jimi Hendrix for their theme or in their movie for this particular place, and Hendrix, in a fit of good taste, turned them down. So, but our producer had something to do with the company, the film company. And so what I did was I went in and I said, well, how about if I play Purple Haze backwards? And so that's what
I love that. Exactly. That's exactly, because that's what it is. It's Purple Haze backwards.
Exactly. You're right.
Oh, my God. Because when I heard it, I said, this kind of sounds like... And then there's pictures of Hendrix. I mean, again, like I said, all the tracks are up there, and a lot of them are very short, but it was with Uni. How did you get the deal with Uni? I mean, this is what I'm being very sincere. At 39 years old, the biggest issue facing Gen Xers and millennials is that they don't have any time to actually stay together as a band, and they can't increase the vocabulary of music. You talked about country instruments blending in rock music. That all came from the fact that you just had a chance to play and play and play on the bandstand, generally with the same cats. And here we have a situation where you had a record deal and nobody even knew who you were. How did that even go down?
Well, what's that Tom Hanks movie, That Thing You Do? Have you ever seen that?
I'm just, dude, I really just talk to you cats. I don't watch a lot of films. No, I don't know. I'm not a movie guy.
Well, it's a film about the 60s, a little local band having some guy in a van who can make records discover them at a pizza parlor. And then, the whole thing turns into they get picked up by a bigger label, and they go on to have a hit. And, that's right. Basically the movie.
Right.
That's it's ironic because it's like Spinal Tap. That's exactly what happened to us. This guy come to where we were playing in Colorado to a little club. He said he thought we had potential. He signed us. We cut a song called "Still in Love with You, Baby," and it was like #1 in Colorado for 10 weeks. And Uni took over the record from the guy who signed us and distributed it nationwide. But it never hit nationwide. It only hit in Colorado. But we were still on Uni, and Uni was doing the soundtrack to that movie. So that's how that whole thing. But some of the irony in that is that I've done music for 2 movies. Well, I've done music for other movies that weren't under Poco, and I was just the guy playing steel. But the 2 movies that I've done in the bands that I've been in and written songs for were Flower Power, and I think it has a new title now when they play it at 3 a.m. And the other movie was a movie, and it was the same thing. It was a movie about, rock and roll, drugs, and sex, same as Flower Power. And it had a brand new guy starring in it that they said, someday this guy is really going to be huge. And so I had the opening cut on that movie, and it's called Fast Times at Ridgemont High.
Oh, my God. Are you kidding me?
And it was Sean Penn.
It's one of my. See, I know that film. I mean, that's a legendary film.
Yeah, it was really cool. So my only 2 movies that I've been a part of are Fast Times at Ridgemont High and Flower Power with the same. So anytime people make a movie about sex, drugs, and rock and roll, I'm figuring they must call me. So.
Well, okay, I just want to be clear. I'm looking down this is 4 discs. This is the Flower Power, the music of the Love Generation. Is that what you're referring to?
Wow, I don't know. I mean, that was 66 probably.
I'm just trying to figure out what was the name of the track that, I mean, you only you had one track on that soundtrack, or, because I mean, this is like.
On which one?
On the Flower Power one. I just want to know which track.
I think Ashbury Wednesday was our only track on there.
I dig.
And then didn't they have like the Yardbirds and some other bands you'd heard of?
Well, it's funny you bring this up. We have a game on this program called Name That Voice, and we're talking to a beautiful cat, a guy who is stretching people's ears, a sonic expander on his steel guitar. I want you to take a listen to this individual talking, and then the content, and then we'll come back and break it down. Okay?
Well, I became friends with Ginsberg, and he was, I had read Kerouac and some of the other beat writers, but I became friends with Alan, and he was a pretty good mind stretcher. He was a very fascinating human being. He used to come when we were playing on Sunset Strip with the Byrds. He would come with his partner, and they would dance to the music, and just all night. They would dance all night. They were just overjoyed with it. They loved it. And so I wound up having many opportunities to talk with him about him and compatriots, from San Francisco area and stuff. And that was part of my developing ethos. They influenced me a lot in terms of thinking about freedom and thinking about, having a wide mind. The guys were fine poets, and I would read their stuff, and I would, in the case of Kerouac, it was prose, but, I would read their stuff, and there was ideas in there, lots of ideas.
Had this album. I know it's all right, Mr. Young, do you know who that is?
Well, it must have been either McGuinn or Chris Hillman. Doesn't sound like Chris, though.
Well, you're nailing it. It's David Crosby, who was also a Bird, okay? And, the point was that regardless of whether you mingled with these cats or not, the point is you got Ginsberg and his partner showing up all night long dancing. And I'm like, I have a feeling that Rusty's bands, or even when you first came out to Southern California, you were playing the Sunset Strip. And I just wanted you to talk about the concept of sonic expansion, musical freedom, and the purist psychedelics, and how that all intertwined with your musical evolution.
Yeah, Ginsberg and those guys, they were before I got. That was like '66, I think, and I got to L.A. I did the Buffalo Springfield session at about the beginning of '68, and so those guys are pretty much long gone by the time I got there. But to your point, when you talk about, musical boundaries and expression and that kind of thing, I have a story I want to tell you that really is meaningful to me. And the story goes that, we played with The Who. We opened for The Who at some club or some place, the Hollywood Palace, that's it, in Los Angeles, in Hollywood. And kind of got to know a little bit, Keith Moon and some of the guys. Daltrey kept to himself, but Moon, was one guy who was really friendly and out there. And so we were recording at Record Plant in Los Angeles, Poco was, and I was in the front of the building where they let people in, and there were a couple of guys in the studio. There were 3 studios there, and we were in one, and the other one had Dino Danelli and Gene Cornish, who were from the Young Rascals.
Absolutely.
And we'd done a lot of shows with them. And so when their band broke up, Clive Davis, as he was wont to do, gave them a project to produce. And it was this heavy metal guy, the guy that wrote the hits like 18 or, for Alice Cooper. And, he was the guy that never wore a shirt and had his hair down to his waist and that kind of thing, the classic image. And the album they were doing on him was a heavy metal album. And it was classic. It had basically 3 chords, 10 songs with 3 chords in them, pretty much the same 3 chords. And it was not my cup of tea, and I guess nobody else's because it never sold anything. But they're doing this heavy metal record. I watched them struggle, and they had this one track that they couldn't get the drums they wanted on it, and they hired like every drummer from New York to L.A. that was famous, and had them come by the studio and overdub on this record. And I would go back there and sit, because they were my friends. I'd go back there and sit and watch them do it and struggle through this. So one day I'm up front, like I said, hitting on the receptionist, and this big black limo pulls up, and the door opens up, and these two gorgeous blonde girls get out in their black dresses. One of them is holding a stick bag, and right behind them is Keith Moon, and Keith is in a tuxedo with the the bow tie and the whole 9 yards.
Oh man, oh boy.
And I thought, I said, I got to see this. So I follow him down the hall into the studio, and they put up that track that they've been working on. And I looked out into the studio, and Keith's drums were set up on a riser, as if he was playing for an audience. Not in the typical drum station, but on a riser. So things got off to a really bizarre start right from the beginning. And so they said to him, "Well, do you want to hear the track and before you go out there?" And he said, "No, it doesn't matter. I'll go out." So he goes out in the studio and he puts on his headphones, and he tapes them with gaffer's tape to his head so they won't fall off, or maybe they were keeping his head on. I'm not sure. So they put the track on, and like I said, it was real predictable. Just three chords, just your typical heavy metal song of the day. And Keith starts playing, and he's playing. Now, there are rules in drumming. To this day, there are rules in drumming. Like most instruments have rules. On drums, what you do, you play a fill, and then you go, that's the intro, and then you go into the verse. And
right.
The verse is snare and hi-hat. Then it comes to the chorus, and you do a big fill, and you go to the big cymbal. This is just how drumming works. Those are the rules. Fill, verse thing, fill, chorus thing. So they're playing the track, and Keith is not playing to any of those rules. And Keith had his share of drugs, which I think relates to our conversation. But he's not following the rules. In the verse, he would play along, and he's playing fills all over where the guy's singing, and he's playing on the big cymbal, and then it would come to the chorus, and he'd go, and he'd go down right to hi-hat, and exactly the opposite of what the rules are for drums. And, as he was going, you knew what he was doing. He was listening to what was going on musically and lyrically and playing what he felt fit that. And so I'm standing in the back, and I thought, geez, this is really making this terrible song interesting. This is really genius. And Gene and the drummer, Gino, look over at each other, and they say, that is the worst piece of crap I've never heard worse drumming in my life. What is he doing? And, eventually he did a couple of tracks, and at one point he broke a stick, and they stopped the tape, and he freaked out. He said, don't ever stop the tape when I'm playing because I've got a lot of sticks out here. I'll just grab another one. Just totally not what you do in the studio. So anyway, they call him back in. He comes into the studio, and they, mates, that was really great. And, they played it back for him, and they said, really cool. And he leaves. And the two of them go, man, there is no way we could ever use that. It was just horrible. And it struck me for the first time ever, and for the only time ever, I saw the connection between music and art. Because if you took a Picasso to somebody who had no idea who Picasso was and said, that's a drawing of a woman, they'd say, well, that's terrible. That doesn't look anything like a woman. It's all distorted, and that's not a woman. And they'd be right. And the same thing with Keith's music. You could listen to it and you can say, that is genius. That is so interesting and creative. Or you could say that was bullshit, crap, and you'd be right too. So for the first time, to me, I understood how art and music can connect. And I tried to do that. I tried to use that in my life, in my career. It was not being predictable. Not playing what the rules say that you play, going outside the lines and making something new. And a bunch of people are going to tell you you're stupid and terrible and horrible, and other people are going to get it. And that was a lesson I learned from Keith Moon, and I use it to this day. And I think it's an important one to pass on.
First of all, you're nailing what the Jake Feinberg Show over the last 6 years. This is long-form stream of consciousness interviews with guys that were able to associate or as close to the source of the original masters of the music as possible. And this is really important because I've done a bunch of interviews with the great jazz guitar. I hate genres, but the great guitar player Pat Martino, and he talks very, very, very sincerely about this concept. And I want you to riff on it because it goes right to the moon story. Before I ask you that, though, I just want to be clear. Who was the cat whose album was it? You don't remember the cat who was doing the heavy metal album, or it was being produced by Dino?
It was being produced by Gene Cornish and Dino Danelli, the guitar player and drummer from Young Rascals.
Of course, yeah.
I don't remember. Actually, I have a book that I'm going to finish because this is the last chapter, but I can't finish it until this chapter that I'm in right now ends. But in the book, I did research and found his name, and it's there, but I don't have time to go downstairs and look it up. So I don't remember.
I mean, at some point, friend. Well, I have a friend request into you on Facebook, so a lot of your stories are going to be blasted out all over new media. So make sure you get me that cat's name because I would love. I could probably do my own research on it, but this is the issue, Rusty.
All you have to do is go to Alice Cooper 18 and see who wrote that.
Well, to me, it's a beautiful. And do you have any idea if actually his drum track wound up on the record?
No, it didn't. I think, as a matter of fact, I think they used somebody like Dallas Taylor, and
Sure.
Dallas Taylor did this on every record he ever played on. So they used, whoever it was somebody who played according to the rules.
Right. It was just pedestrian, even though they went through 4,000 different drummers. Here's the question.
Right.
The
lesson too maybe is that record bombed. And
right, because they played by the rules.
They played by the rules. And I think if they would have broken off and used Moon and used him on maybe more cuts, that it would have had a chance, people catching people's interest.
This is important, and maybe you could talk about another story if it comes to mind. But Pat Martino talks about this. It's very much a part of the difference as between being a craftsman and being a musician. You talk about just playing what the rules that a drummer is supposed to play, as opposed to as a drummer playing the tune or playing melodically on the trap set. But with Pat, if you're just going in as a studio cat and you're just being told what to play and you're just a craftsman. Can you talk about Rusty Young, the how you feel about being a craftsman, how you break the threshold between being a craftsman and being a musician?
Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, I've done sessions. I was a big session player in the 70s.
I know.
And into the in Nashville in the 70s, I played on everyone from Gladys Knight to Three Dog Night. I played on Joe Walsh records all the way to Joan Baez records, and did a lot of sessions and did sessions in Nashville. And I think the Nashville story, even today, really highlights what you're talking about, or what Pat was talking about. I was doing sessions in LA and I quit entirely because I got fed up with it. And you can hear it on the records that are made out of LA today. A lot of them. There's some guys like Sturgill Simpson who are, break the mold. But most of the hit records and stuff like that you hear are done by the same five guys. They're the instrumentalists on a lot of that stuff. And when you're in the studio, especially in Nashville, what happened was, everything's a budget. You sit down, they hand you a chart, and you run through the chart, and then they press go. And the goal is to get that song on one take, the first take. And if you don't play perfectly, or you make a mistake or something, then they'll keep the track with the guys that played great, and they'll say, okay, who needs to go again? And it's like public shaming. I didn't get my
right.
What happens is I learned to, and I started doing this, and that's why I quit, because I couldn't stand not being able to be creative in the studio, because that was what it's always been to me, is a creative place. But it got to the point where I could see that these guys who were great musicians were playing the same thing over and over. They were playing safe because they didn't want to make a mistake, so they would play something they knew they could play without making a mistake. So things always sound the same because they're playing basically the same, and they're not taking chances. Great musicians, I think, take chances. That's how you get to be, stand out from the crowd. You don't play what everybody else is playing. You take chances, but you can't take chances without making mistakes. And in that game in the studio, if you made a mistake, they probably wouldn't call you back the next time around when they're doing something, so you would lose your job. So all these guys are playing just as safe as they can, afraid that if they make a mistake, they won't be an A-lister anymore. And it just makes the music so predictable and so non-rewarding as an artist. Now, that's the difference between an artist and a musician, I guess.
This is interesting.
Because,
Did you split and quit because of this? Because listen, I think it's important in a live context because Rusty Young has had just tremendous bandstand experience with groundbreaking bands. Mistakes on the bandstand can lead to, there are no wrong notes, as Miles Davis said. So if you all go in that direction, it could take off in a different portal, and it's transcending. Everyone's getting off. But was there a point in the studio where you tried to stretch out and be creative, and someone just took you to task, and you said, this isn't worth it anymore?
Well, that didn't happen. They wouldn't do that, but they would public shame you. Like I said, they would say, if you said, well, you learn real quickly, maybe first track, first take, that if you need a special chance to try and do something special, you're gonna get called out for it. And then what happens is, from at least in my experience, what I would do is I went, okay, I understand the game now. You don't really want me to create something. You just want me to fill a sonic space. And so
that's right.
That's what I would do. And I got to the point of where I got so tired of filling sonic spaces that I didn't have to do it. I did it because I wanted to be creative and I wanted to make a difference. But when it got to the obvious that was not going to happen, then that's when I stopped doing it.
Talking to Rusty Young here on the Jake Feinberg Show. I was transcribing my interview with Tommy Coster, who was the keyboardist for Santana, and he came out of the Air Force, and the only thing he played growing up was the accordion. And he was playing jazz on the accordion, and he made it sound like a Hammond organ. And I was reading last night about how you early on with your steel guitar, I want you to take the audio. This is so important because, we are saturated with information. We are saturated with instruments, and yet people don't see that from the simplest instrument, you can create totally different sounds. I think that what I was reading was that you eventually you were able to get your steel guitar to sound like a B3 organ by the way you put it through a Leslie speaker. Or I just want you to talk about the inventiveness of taking an apparatus and then taking it and expanding it sonically, because your generation, your ears were not locked. Your ears were wide open. There were no books. There was no Rusty Young book on steel guitar. There were no jazz curriculums in universities. So, can you talk about how you stretched the sonic nature of the steel guitar, and if in fact how you got it to sound like an organ?
Sure. I growing up in Denver, Colorado, I worked at a music store called Don Edwards Guitar City, and it was kind of the focal point for steel guitars in the whole Midwest. It was the place everybody came, and it drew a lot of great musicians to the place. And I sold guitars and gave music lessons. And one day I met a guy. A guy came in and got hired there from Oklahoma, and his name was Donnie Buzzard.
Buzzard.
Donnie, a great name.
I love it. A total mercurial cat. All right, go ahead.
Yeah, he became my. I was probably 15 when I first met him, or 14. My muse, my ideal. He was a great steel player and truly one of the greats. And but he didn't want to be a Nashville or L.A. cat. So he was perfectly happy to be in the scene that we were in. It was perfect for him. And he was really cool. He had the Buddy Holly look, and he drove a brand new Corvette every year, and he was just a brilliant player. And he's the one that changed my outlook on a lot of things, because he preached that the steel guitar didn't have to be just whack, 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 the same old thing, that it was just strings, and it could be anything. you weren't limited to playing what people could, recognized as steel guitar or pedal steel guitar. And so he was the first guy I ever saw playing what Alvino Ray introduced, who's another great steel guitar player from the 40s. And that's the voice box that Pierre Frampton and Joe Walsh used, where it's your guitar but your voice combined. And he was the first one I ever saw with that, Donnie was. And
wow.
He taught me you can play with, instead of a metal bar, if you play with a comb, a piece of plastic, it'll make the guitar sound more like a piano, like what is it, the tinkle tinkle piano, the Roaring 20s piano, attack piano. That's the word I was looking for.
Attack piano, right?
Old age is catching up.
You're doing fine.
He showed me a lot of things, and one of them, all these things just led to me going, well, I wonder what it would sound like if we plug into a Leslie speaker, which is what an organ uses as its voice. And when we were selling guitars and giving guitar lessons, I'd go there directly from high school, and a lot of times there'd be hours, that you'd be in there with nothing to do. And so it's a music store. We would plug into anything, and we'd have jam sessions, and we'd try all kinds of stuff, and it was an incredible learning place for me. And as a matter of fact, when I got called to go to Los Angeles, and we started Poco, and I started doing sessions, I was stunned that the musicianship, the steel guitar players in Nashville, were so limited. They were just playing that same old country, stuff, and they weren't really great musicians, great players. In Denver, Colorado, we had great players, and the guys in Los Angeles would have starved if they were trying to do what they were doing in Colorado. And so I was really stunned at the time. The really great Buddy Emmons and Jimmy Days and some of those players, eventually ended up in L.A. and changed that scene big time. But it was an education I got from this guy, Donnie Buzzard. And I thought, when I joined that rock and roll band, the Benzie Crick that you talked about.
Yeah.
I thought, wow, let me do this. Let me take this, and make it. I'll put a fuzz tone on it. No one's ever done that.
Oh, you're brilliant. This is so you. But you can. No one had ever done this. Even though Buzzard was a major catalyst for your imagination, nobody had ever put a steel guitar through a Leslie speaker, and no one put a fuzz tone on it before.
No one had done that.
That better be in your book, by the way.
Yeah, believe me, it is. My book's snapshots, and it's an odd book. It's an unauthorized autobiography, by the way, and it has about 160 chapters, and that's because some of the chapters are just one page.
Right.
There'll be a little story, or something, and then some of them, like the Janis Joplin story, are 20 pages long. So it's got all different kinds of things, and all the pictures are snapshots. And all the stories are little snapshots of the 50 years I've been in the recording business, in the music business.
So when you first started, this is the other thing, were you like searching out like Jimmy Smith records where you could kind of emulate those lines, because you had to create the sequencing had to be a little bit different when you're trying to get it to sound like an organ. I'm just trying to, for cats, this is what I'm trying to get at, is that this idea of people to start using their brains again and not relying on the apparatus itself, but being creative within that. Were you stretching out to your jazz vernacular by seeking out organ records?
You nailed it. Jake. I'm very impressed. I did. Jimmy Smith. I would listen to him, and all the great organ players. And what I did was I emulated their phrasing and they use certain notes. Like on a G chord, they'd have a high G, and then down below it a B, and then down below that a D, and they would move those notes below but hold the top note. And so if I played the same thing that they played through the Leslie, people immediately thought it was an organ, because I'm playing the same things they would play, but I'm playing it on the steel guitar. And so, for a long time in Poco, people thought I was an organ player. B3.
This is so. I mean, outside of the psychedelic Jimi Hendrix backwards Purple Haze. I mean, can you point from my own deep bag? I mean, are there other tunes that were recorded where you're channeling that organ sound? I mean, it's a hypnot. I mean, also during that time, it was the organ. The boogaloo was going on big time at that time, so it was really hot in the clubs too. But are there other tracks that you can point me to, or albums where you are really channeling that, the phrasing of the masters like Jimmy and those cats?
Yeah, if you listen to Poco's second record,
right,
the side B is all one long instrumental, and it's it was a Jimmy Messina idea and project really. Who was producing that record, and we did an 18-minute long instrumental.
In that, holy cow! I got to get this.
I go through all the things. I play fuzz tone. I play the B3, and that's a perfect place to check that out.
I wanted to read this. I don't know if you ever crossed paths with Barry Melton from Country Joe and the Fish, but he in our second interview, he said this, and I want you to relate this to Poco or even Buffalo Springfield, because you guys are not, I don't think you consider yourself a jazz musician, but this is what he told me. He said, we, meaning the psychedelic folk, because all the cats in the Bay Area were folk musicians, and then eventually became psychedelic rock musicians, but he said, we knew what jazz was. It was counterculture. And if you understand jazz standards are really the corniest songs, My Funny Valentine, for instance. But by the time you get to the middle of the song, you can't tell what it is necessarily because you drop the presumption of structure. You know what you're playing, which helps, but it doesn't sound like the song you begin with. You can do that through other kinds of music as well, and that's in essence what the music was driven to. We understood what jazz was, but nobody knew how to do that in traditional folk music. When you're really in the zone, the structure exists, but it only exists in your mind. You're no longer tied to it. So I want you to relate that presumption of structure to the country rock, because like you said, Clive Davis came to you and said, there ain't ever going to be a steel guitar on a hit record. And you were blending country instruments with rock music. So take what Barry said and relate it to what you were doing with Buffalo and the fact that once you leave the head of the song, it can be anything you want.
Well, yeah, I mean, we weren't jazz, that's for sure, and we were trying to appeal to a mainstream audience where a lot of jazz guys, they have their niche, and that's who they appeal to, and they don't really care about anything else. I don't think, at least that's the impression I've got. So, the way we did it was that we would change forms, like in the song that I was talking about on side 2 of album 2. And we did this in a lot of songs. I actually just did this in a re-recording of Rosa Cimarron. We would take the basis of the song and then move the chord structure to a different chord structure. And we've done that even on songs that were recorded 30 years ago. When we do them now, we'll play the classic chord structure and then go into an alternate chord structure that suits that piece of music. And then that gives you the freedom to really be creative without being tied down to what everyone's heard as the original, which is basically the concept that he's talking about, all within a song.
Well, couldn't that be jazz? I mean, what's your definition of improvisation? Because that sounds to me like jazz.
Well, it is improvisation, and rock has that at its heart. Maybe it borrowed that from jazz, and it borrowed the feel from the blues. I think rock musicians gather from a lot of different places, so it entirely could be that. I mean, when I was growing up, I played jazz. I had teachers in Denver who were great jazz players, and I took lessons from them and tried to learn like 12 tone as opposed to the standard, and really was. I did jazz gigs. I played little clubs with a jazz trio, a bass and drums and me.
Are you kidding me? With the steel guitar?
Yeah.
Oh my God, we need to get the tapes of this immediately. A trio, steel, upright bass, and trap set.
Yeah, well, Buddy Emmons, who's like the father of it all.
Of course.
He's got a lot of albums. He has several albums out there. I can't think of the titles off the top of my head that were strictly jazz albums. I mean, I learned to play Back Home in Indiana and a lot of those from Buddy Emmons' jazz records. And he was a great jazz player.
Well, no, but I mean, like with you, were you at that point? Were you writing original tunes?
No, and I was 16, 17 years old, so I probably wasn't playing all that great, but I thought I was.
Oh, sure. No, but,
but
were there? Could you talk about, because Denver had? I interviewed Cedar Walton, the great piano player, a while back, and there was a couple of amazing clubs that Coltrane would come through. Did you get to see some of the masters who had? Because a lot of the time when I talk to cats like you, or really good jazz guitar players, they always were influenced by cats that didn't play that instrument, or they developed their rhythm through other. Were there seminal cats that you got to see live? And what I talk about with jazz, like you talked about jazz being kind of like almost like an inside joke, and they sort of cater to their own audience. And I think that is true in modern contemporary jazz. But there was a period of time where there was this crying, anguish, searching. It wasn't anger music. It was just spiritual, transcendent music. And I'm wondering if you could talk about, because you were trying to play jazz, and which cats really did you get off on? Was it Wes Montgomery, or was it someone more like Miles or Train?
No, it'd be more like Wes Montgomery. Like I said, what I did was Buddy Emmons forged the way. He was the first steel guitar player Donnie Buzzard did too. But, Buddy was the first big artist on steel guitar to really open up that field for the steel guitar. And so, what I did was I would listen to him play, Yellow Bird, and then I would go and do it the same way to other songs, other jazz songs, or songs, you get requested every time you're a guy playing in a bar somewhere. And so I would just take the style that he showed on those records and apply that to songs that I was playing. I wasn't really creating anything special because, guys had done that before me. But it was just a fun outlet for me because it was different than the regular pedal steel, stuff that was common on the radio and common with steel guitar. But it was really those guys, Buddy, and like I said, my friend Donnie Buzzard, who showed me how to do that stuff.
That was the other question, is that second Poco album on the backside, like when even with Buffalo, like how much were how much did you have to balance this thing between, well, just the simplest question is, how similarly was the album as it related to the live performance? Like, was it discernibly different? Would you actually break up, like, would you stretch the tunes out, or were you conscious of the fact that you had an audience that was coming to hear the songs on the record?
Well, Jimmy's a stickler to this day. I just sat in with Jimmy about a week ago, or a week from Friday,
right.
A week ago, and Jimmy's a stickler for, like, he's our band's Don Henley, a stickler for every note being exactly the same as it was on the record. So when we played it out in concert, as I remember, as close as I could do it, I played it the same way night after night. I don't do that anymore, and I don't really believe in that. I couldn't go out night after night and play concert after concert and play the same songs exactly the same way. I mean, when we do Rosa Cimarron that I recorded in '76, we don't do it the same way we did it back then. We don't do Heart of the Night the same way we recorded it. It would just drive me crazy. But then there are some songs like Crazy Love. There are certain songs that require being exactly like the record. And, my friends like in America, Dewey and Jerry, they've got to do Horse with No Name exactly the way they recorded it. If they turned it into like a jazz version or something, the audience, would probably start throwing things. And I understand there are some bands that, their hits are so huge and all that kind of stuff that they have an obligation to play them exactly like the record, and that's great for them. Maybe I'm glad that we didn't have except for Crazy Love, a giant hit that we have to play exactly the same. We play Take It to the Limit exactly the same every night. I think I would go crazy. And which brings on another story, if you'd like to hear it about Tom.
I mean, this is why we're hanging, man. Go ahead.
It's a story about Tom Fogerty, and it's another story that I find, that has a place in my life.
Mm-hmm.
The song we were just talking about, to Rosa Cimarron in 1976. Around that time, we were touring with Creedence Clearwater, and they were the biggest thing on the planet. We were playing all huge coliseums and stuff like that. No one had got to football fields yet. They were hugely successful, and I got to know Tom. John was pretty standoffish, but Tom his brother was a real nice guy.
Dude, I love Tom Fogerty. Dude, rest in peace, man. What a great cat. I always just felt like he was a good cat. So I love talking about this.
He was a really good cat. Well, we were in Europe. We flew to Europe, flew to Paris to do a European tour to promote Rosa Cimarron. And as you know, you get jet lag. So when you get there, the whole idea is to stay up, because you'll arrive at 10 or 12 at night usually, and you need to stay up all night long and have as much of the next day as you can to get back on schedule. So we arrived there, and the record company, bless their hearts, had taken the whole penthouse of the Ritz Hotel where we were staying in France. They'd taken up the penthouse for a party for us. But unfortunately, the party went on before we got there. By the time we got it was over. And I remember walking into the penthouse. I was trying to stay awake. And, you walk in, there's that haze of smoke, and, it's real fancy. And, there are people passed out on couches around here and there, and the champagne bucket with the champagne bottle turned upside down. There was nothing left to drink or eat. And I walked in, and I saw sitting at the table was Tom Fogerty. And I went over and sat down. Tom, gee, what are you doing here? And I guess they were going to do a tour, and he was there early. And so we're talking, about, what we'd done and all this kind of stuff. And then Tom looks over at me, and he says, well, I'm quitting Creedence Clearwater. And I thought, wow, that's unbelievable. Here's a guy who didn't write. His brother wrote. He didn't sing. Basically, he did this, and I'm going to do it for you. He did this. Well, his brother went. That was it. And so I'm thinking, here's a guy who's making millions a year.
Right.
Staying in the best places, meeting the best people, having a great life. All he does is da-da-da-da. And he's quitting. This guy's got to be out of his mind. And I told him that. I said, I can't believe you're doing this. I think you're out of your mind. And I said, well, why in the world would you quit? And he said, if I have to play Proud Mary one more time, I'm going to kill myself.
Wait, what year was this? Basically, like early 70s?
76. It had to be, because we were promoting Rose.
Right.
And
so he had he had made a couple of solo albums earlier than that, but he was still locked into the formulaic Creedence. It was driving him over the edge.
Oh yeah. Well, and I'm sure there was some brotherly stuff going on there.
Of course.
No, I told Tom, I said, and this is really true, because I'll play the places like the Bluebird in Nashville or something with other songwriter friends, and 9 times out of 10, these guys won't play their hit. It'll be a room full of people who know these guys by the hits, and they'll play, whole 3-hour session, 4 or 5 of us, and they'll never play their hits, and it just drives me crazy. I'm so proud, of Crazy Love that I have a hit that's so special. And I told Tom, I said, Tom, I think you're crazy. If I had a hit like that, I would do what Hank Williams used to do with Your Cheatin' Heart. Hank would open with Your Cheatin' Heart. He'd play it in the middle of his set, and then he'd close with Your Cheatin' Heart. And if he got an encore, he'd play Your Cheatin' Heart. So, having a hit is so special, and so few people really get to do that on the planet that, it just blew my mind. So I think of Tom every night when I play Crazy Love, because I'm thrilled to play that song every night, because it's meant something in people's lives, and I've made a difference. And I think of Tom with Proud Mary, and think, would I really want? Can I really stop playing this? So anyway, that was a lesson in my life.
Well, no, this is this is as best because I know Jim. I mean, you and Jim are still cooking the groove on the bandstand, but I mean, how did you keep yourself? I mean, you had to sing for your supper. You guys were definitely doing okay financially, and you had a gig, but I mean, you were also playing. I just want to be clear. I mean, Rusty Young was cooking the groove with Pacific Gas and Electric in the studio. You were on every studio album in the early 70s, but in the live setting, how, as candidly as you can be, how did you keep it interesting if you had a stickler like Messina who was saying, no, we have to play it the same way? How did you keep it going for so long?
Well, Jimmy only did, what did he do? He did 3 records with us.
I see.
2. And one of them was live. He and Richie didn't see eye to eye on a lot of things, and so Jimmy, he got the opportunity to go produce, and he ran into Kenny Loggins, and the rest is history.
Right.
He wasn't there for a long time. In the beginning with Poco, that was a learning experience for me. Jimmy and Richie knew a lot. They knew a lot about the studio that I didn't. I had to learn. They knew about publishing. They knew the business side, kinda. And, they knew about writing songs and singing, and they knew how the business worked, and I didn't. So for those first 5 years, I sat back and really watched and learned. And my job was to contribute the musical color side. I was the palette, and I helped, I formed arrangements, and forced is probably the right word. I helped arrangements on songs. And, I helped with the vocal arrangements. I learned how to do that. And just, from the guys, they taught me. And so in the first few years, I was perfectly happy to do that with Jimmy. And Jimmy's a friend to this day, and I think will always be a great friend. And he's always got something to teach me. But he and I are different in that way. I mean, he does 3-hour sound checks at every concert he plays. And
wow.
Yeah. And it drives me crazy.
So I mean, it was.
Time the show comes, I'm beat. I've done it. So I don't operate like that. We don't operate like that. We have a system for doing sound checks that is as painless as possible. And but he's got his way, and his concerts are awesome. They're perfect because he's a perfectionist, and that was fine at that time. And I'm glad it worked for him. And L&M, they play every night. They played note for note what was on the record exactly, without exception. And more power to them. It just, like I say, if I go on stage and I can't create, it makes me a little crazy.
Well, I mean, we got another name that voice here for you. This is a cat. Actually, I haven't heard you reference him yet. I want you to see if you can identify this cat.
No.
This is why I do my show, and then we'll come back and break it down, my man. Hold on.
Yeah, well, on our way back from California, I stopped at their house, Earl and Louise, and I was talking about how we played in a couple of those clubs in San Francisco where you could just smell the pot in the air.
Sure.
And Earl had played in those clubs too. Was it the Avalon Ballroom, one of the big ones?
The Fillmore, yeah, all those clubs. Yeah, sure.
And he said, but he didn't smoke anymore, so he couldn't check it out. And I said, well, you don't really have to smoke it. You can eat it. And in fact, I've got some brownies out in the car, and if you wanted to try it out. So I brought in 3 brownies, and I decided I'd eat one just to show him that it was cool. I mean, that it,
Yeah, right.
wasn't going to keel over. And then he ate one, and Louise decided to keep hers till later. And one point he turned to Louise and said, Louise, the color is fading in and out of a TV. And she said, but Earl, this commercial is in black and white.
Do you have any idea who that is?
I don't, but it's nice to know he supports the Girl Scouts.
Well, no, this is the pedal steel player. Rest in peace, Bill Keith.
Oh no, that's me.
Bill Keith.
Oh, Bill Keith. Wow.
Okay, so Bill Keith. The story there that I heard from Dog Grisman when I've done 4 interviews with David, and then I asked Bill. He made a batch of pot brownies and brought them. He was driving back through Texas, and he hung it, and he got it, and he stopped by Earl Scruggs' house. And Earl ingested one, and like he said, he said the TV's fading in and out of color. She said, no, this commercial's in black and white.
That's
and,
hilarious.
You know, it's so tripped. But I mean, you were on the Earl Scruggs review.
Right.
You caught that, and I traced back Sam Cooke and Ray Charles as soul and R&B, the masters, and Bird and Diz and all these cats and jazz and, you know, Little Richard and Elvis and rock and roll. And here it is, Scruggs. You know, that album, so many seminal characters on it, but I really wanted you to go back and talk about I know you don't play bluegrass, but who were the original masters of the music that you got off on the most? And if you could talk about that experience, was that the first time that you had a chance to burn with Scruggs?
Well, I knew Randy, his son Randy, and you know, his boys were, you know, very active in the music scene in Nashville. And I'd seen him around. You know, I like to see everybody. I took Richie to see Buck Owens, and that was a big impact on us when we were first starting off the band. I think he wrote pieces because of that experience. And there's a whole story there someday I'll tell you.
Please.
But, you know, it's funny. The stories about drugs are all kind of amusing, but it's not a funny thing. And it's not a thing that should be glorified. I got to tell you, it had a really horrible effect that I saw, you know, in the music business. You talk about the Avalon, the Fillmore. I remember playing the Fillmore when the guy from T-Rex was sitting in the shadows at the side of the stage. What's his name? The lead singer in T-Rex.
Go ahead. What happened? Did he die?
Well, he's dead, yeah. But he was sitting at the side of the stage, and he had just dropped some acid, and he had, you know, a girl with him, and they were in a clump, and he was sitting at the side of the stage just crying like crazy. And, you know, a month later, he was dead. And, you know, I was with Janis Joplin. We played her last concert tour, and to see how it affected her was so very sad. And I know the experience we had with drugs on the road. You know, it destroys people. It destroyed people. It killed people. And the ones that didn't destroy it harmed so bad. At one point, we had a drug dealer who traveled with the band, and it was such a sad thing because what happened was, you know, he'd give drugs to musicians, band members, so let's say, all right. But then the roadies would get upset because they weren't getting any, and you know, they're turned into this whole fight. And then you saw the roadies; they were giving all the money they were making. They're out there on the road. They'd turn around and give to the drug dealer to get the drugs that, you know, so they could keep up with the rock stars. And then, you know, they'd get home and they wouldn't have money to pay the mortgage. They have families and this, and, you know, but they'd get hung up and strung out, and they'd be on the road and they'd spend all their money, and it just ruined so many lives. And, you know, there are humorous anecdotes we can all tell. But the basic thing is that it was a horrible thing, and I saw it ruin a lot of lives.
Well, I want to be clear, and listen, Rusty, I completely agree, and I really don't. Cocaine and heroin, the hard drugs, yeah, they ruin lives. You know, the idea that what I'm trying to get at is that the expansion of musical vocabulary was so pertinent during the late '60s when Buffalo and when Poco came about, and marijuana is. I don't have any qualms with that, nor do I have any qualms
Neither do I.
with LSD, because you know what? What I'm saying is Earl Scruggs, who is as country as they come, was eating a pot brownie, and he was having a ball. And it was...
Yeah, but the same time that's happening, I got to tell you.
Go ahead.
You know, there's Dillard and Clark, Gene Clark and Doug Dillard. And
Right.
Doug was a great bluegrass banjo player. You probably know.
Burning.
And they, you know, kind of after they saw us, they started a band. And it was a great band. I saw them at rehearsals. And by the time they got from rehearsing in Doug Dillard's living room to on the stage at the Troubadour, they were a mess. They were so strung out on, I don't know what all. I know there was, all kinds of besides cocaine and heroin, things going on, and the LSD. And they were so bad. They were awful on stage. They had guys like Bernie Ledden walking off stage because he couldn't stand to be on stage with them. And these guys were great musicians who totally screwed up their lives doing that stuff. Now, I got to say, on the other hand, what happens with drugs like that I saw is there were guys who would take these drugs and use them as a learning experience. They would play really poorly, 9 times out of 10, but 1 time out of 10 they'd do something they would have normally not done on a sane brain, and that was part of their creativity, I guess. So, I understand why people would try and do it, but I just, you're talking about, the bluegrass players and that, and boy, I just saw that band, Dillard and Clark, get totally ripped apart by, the drugs.
I take it very seriously, and I respect you were there, and the roadies. I mean, you were there and you witnessed it. Anecdotally, to me, it's like going back to. Maybe you could just talk to the audience about your concept of love, and aside from playing music, how you bring love to the world.
Well, I think that we've been the guys that write songs and write poetry and write books and creative people, the painters. I've been around a lot of painters here in believe it or not. Creative people add something to other people's lives. They bring beauty to it. They bring joy to it. They bring thoughtfulness to it. And that's a gift that is so special, and it's something, after a show when someone comes up and talks to me about how a certain song that I've written affected their lives, or it's a part of their lives, they got married to it, or, he was playing when their first child was born, that kind of stuff, I feel really special because I know when I'm gone that I'm leaving a legacy that will live on, and all these lives, all the people's lives that the music has affected is a gift to them and a gift to me.
That's heavy stuff. I mean, tell me a little bit. We've been cooking here for 65 minutes. Can we do part 2? I'd love to continue this dialogue. I just had a ball with you today.
Oh, well, thanks. You want to call back sometime, you mean?
Yeah. I mean, I'd like to continue the conversation because I don't think we even really touched on. There's a bunch of stuff I'd still like to talk to you about.
Well, why don't we do a call back then? Because I'm, wearing down.
Yeah, no. What I'm saying is, I'll reach out to you. I'll text. But friend me on Facebook too, because that's where my tentacles are way, way, way out, and it's all music.
Cool.
And so friend me, and I got a request to you, and much love to you, Rusty. I look forward to meeting you in person, but we'll do part 2 real soon.
Great. Well, it's been a brilliant interview. You touched on things that people don't normally, and you knew things that people don't normally go to. So I enjoyed the hour. So
all right, man. Yeah,
I'm with you all the way.
All right, Rusty. Talk to you soon, bro. I'll get you a copy. I'll send a copy of this along later today.
Okay, great.
All right, cheers, brother.
Thank you so much.
Be good.
Bye.
Bye. Rusty Young, Buffalo Springfield, and Poco. Those are his most notable bands that he was in, but he's a cat that continues to inspire, just being a creative guy and just quite honestly just being himself. And we'll be back at noon with a whole heap and helping of Marty Rifkin and later Harold Brown. Until then,